Why hello there, and welcome back to Let's Make Us a Character. And the beginning of the second chapter of the story of Gamma World, the Wizards Era, which begins with Gamma World 5th Edition, which was released in 2000 by everyone's least favorite notable publisher, Wizards of the Coast. Although I suppose I didn't really need to tell you it was published in 2000, I could have just shown you the cover and you could have intuited that it was released in 2000. Now, in the Gamma World 4th Edition video, I mentioned how it was the last edition to be published by TSR, and the last edition designed with the involvement of Gamma World's original creator, Jim Ward. But there is something I forgot to mention. It was also the last edition to use a unique system. Basically, while the mechanics of Metamorphosis Alpha and the first two editions of Gamma World were similar to D&D, they weren't really intended to be compatible in any way, nor were they advertised as such. It was a different game, and different games had different rules. That is what you expected when you bought a game, that it was specifically designed to provide a specific gameplay experience. With 4th edition ironically being the first to go out of its way to claim how similar it was to D&D, despite actually being the least similar outside of 3rd edition, which was a whole other thing that I still wish I could like. But then we get to 5th edition, which is a campaign setting for Alternity, just one with game rules included. Gee, if only there were some kind of term for a campaign setting with included rules. Oh well. And you might be wondering, what the fuck is Alternity? Because Wizards of the Coast somewhat notoriously only publishes content for their own games, and has only published a handful of games, mainly based on one system. And honestly, to a more modern player, it might even be surprising that Wizards of the Coast ever published any RPG other than Dungeons & Dragons, because they haven't in over a decade. So, to put it as succinctly as possible, after years, decades honestly, of infighting, mismanagement, and refusal to adapt to a changing market, especially when it came to their flagship product, Dungeons & Dragons, TSR was on the verge of collapse, which put them in a position to be purchased by Wizards of the Coast in 1997, who were then themselves purchased by Hasbro in 1999. And Alternity was a game in production at the time at TSR, which was then later published in 1998 by Wizards of the Coast under the TSR label, which they were publishing all acquired content under at the time, presumably so that the average consumer wouldn't even realize that D&D books were now being published by a completely different company. But then at some point in 1999, whether in an attempt to make 3rd edition a clean break from the past, or possibly due to Hasbro since that is when they acquired Wizards of the Coast, they dropped the TSR branding entirely, later even letting the trademark expire, which led to a bit of a situation. And is kind of ironic considering that this is coming from a company that would later be so litigious and overreaching that they claimed to own a trademark on the word kaiju. And the Wizards actually did support Alternity with new books through the year 2000, and with an RPGA living campaign that ran until 2002. At which point they began chopping it up and feeding the pieces to their hideous new bloated malformed greed child, D20 Modern. And of the 9 Alternity products released in the year 2000, Gamma World 5th Edition was one. Although it is also notably the first edition of Gamma World since Metamorphosis Alpha, so first edition of Gamma World, to have 0 additional releases. And I guess spoilers for the next 2 episodes, also the last. So, history lesson out of the way, let's make us a Gamma World 5th Edition character. Character creation is a simple 8-step process. First, we develop a hero concept, which, as usual, we will not be doing first because, honestly, I think it is the wrong way to make a character in this type of system, and it is much better to go through the process and let your concept develop organically around the character you're building, rather than trying to match a vision that might not even be compatible with the rules. So let's just skip ahead to step 2, choose a species. As always, we have humans and mutants, but then things change up a little bit here, and we have androids, dabbers, Sasquatches, and sleeth. So the options are in some way more and in other ways less interesting than in previous editions. We do finally have the opportunity to play as some of the Gamma World species that have been established parts of the setting, but those options are given instead of, not in addition to, the mutant animals and plants that we have come to know and love. Although it is worth mentioning that the June 2000 issue of Dragon Magazine did feature an article, Gamma Squirrels and Mutant Moose, which actually did add some fairly comprehensive rules for mutant animals, and is notable for being the only piece of supplemental content that the Wizards ever published for 5th edition Gamma World. Also, the androids and Sasquatches are basically just slightly modified versions of 2 species from Alternity. And I'm going to try to do things a little differently here and cover the various special abilities of the species when I get to that part of character creation instead of just listing them now, so that you will actually know what everything means when I mention it. But for now, let's just go with android. We've made mutants of one variety or another in the last 5 videos, so let's take advantage of the fact that they are finally offering something different and do something different. So on to step 3, assign ability scores. Characters have 6 abilities: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, will, and personality. Totally different from strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And we are given 60 points to assign to those based on the minimums and maximums outlined in the ability scores limits table. And longtime viewers may have guessed that I absolutely hate this, because before we actually start allocating our points, we need to go 8 plus 4 plus 6 plus 7 plus 6 plus 4 equals 35, subtracted from 60 is 25 points we actually have to spend. I will say it again, if there is a step in character creation that is identical for all players, or in this case, all players of a specific species, that step is a waste of time and should already be applied. In this case, something as simple as just giving a specified point pool per species along with the minimum and maximum scores would do the job nicely. Also, as long as I'm on the topic here, browsing through the NPCs in the book shows that in the designer's eyes, ability scores below 8 are very uncommon, making that being our highest minimum score seem a little odd. Like, it's fairly clear that they gave you enough points to put 10 in each ability score, and didn't really expect you to go too far above or below that. But you know, let's just see how badly having a dump stat does affect our character, and put 11 points in everything except personality. Also, I do like playing the no people skills robot trope. Then let's take 1 point out of Constitution and put those last 2 points into Strength for a total of 13. And those are all within our ability score limits, so we divide our scores in half, and those are our untrained scores. Then look up all of our scores other than Constitution and Personality on the Resistance modifiers table to get our Resistance modifiers, and as usual, all of these things I am mentioning will make sense when I explain them later. So on to step 4, Mutations. As usual, humans are immune to mutations and resistant to radiation, having a -2 step bonus on the radiation table. And androids are also immune to mutations, but have no general resistance to radiation. Yeah, they did that cop-out thing where androids are a combination of inorganic and organic components which conveniently bestow upon them all of the vulnerabilities of a standard flesh being, because designing playable inorganic creatures with unique disadvantages to balance out their superhuman resistances is very difficult when you are lazy and don't really feel like doing it. So as an android, we do not have to deal with mutations, but I will still explain how they work, just for the sake of explaining how they work. So, mutant characters start with a number of mutations and also have a higher chance of receiving additional mutations from future radiation exposure. And the way mutations are determined in this edition is mutants get 7 points of mutations and 4 points of drawbacks. And then mutations/drawbacks are separated into 3 strengths: ordinary/slight, which cost 1 point, good/moderate, which cost 2 points, and amazing/extreme, which cost 4 points. Although personally I feel like slight, moderate, and extreme would have worked fine for both mutations and drawbacks. And you might be thinking, oh, so it's a point buy system, that's an interesting change. And no, it's not, it's still randomized, but now you have the option of guided or pure randomization, and if you are thinking, oh, pure randomization, that's just like rolling on the table like usual, right? No, it is not. So, for pure randomization, we roll a d8 to determine how our 7 mutation points are to be divided between mental and physical mutations. And 2 is 2 points of physical and 5 points for mental mutations. So basically the same as they were handled in 4th edition. Then we look up the number of points on the mutation randomizer table, and for 2 points we roll any die, let's just use a d6, and an even result is 1 good mutation. Then for 5 we roll a d6, and 3 to 4 is 1 ordinary and 2 good mutations. And then we also have our 4 drawback points, so once again d6, and 5 to 6 is 1 amazing, or in this case extreme drawback. And then for the guided randomization, you get to choose how you want to distribute those points between mental and physical mutations of the various strengths, but don't actually get to choose the mutations yourself. Then to the physical mutations table and roll a d20 on the good column for our 1 good mutation, metamorphosis. Then mental mutations and roll once on the ordinary column and twice on the good column, so battle sense, induce phobia, and levitation. Then onto the drawback table and roll a d12 on the extreme column and poor dual brain. And those would be our mutations if we had mutations, but we don't. Then instead of random mutations, the other species just have species mutations. Dappers getting empathic scan and telepathic hand along with their choice of photokinesis, illusion generation, or kinetic shield, Sasquatches getting improved natural attack, and Sleeth battle sense, contact, psychic perception, rejuvenation, and 1 random ordinary strength mental mutation. Also immunity to illusions, that one's not really a mutation, I just didn't have anywhere else to mention it. So on to step 5, pick a profession. We have 4 options: combat spec, diplomat, free agent, and tech op. None of which really offer anything interesting, and once again wouldn't really make sense right now if I just listed off everything they get, so for now let's just go with combat spec, and I will explain the class benefits as they come up. With the exception of diplomats gaining a contact, because that one won't come up anywhere, and free agents getting to increase one of their resistance modifiers by 1 step, which we already covered. And move on to step 6. Purchase skills. We have a selection of 35 broad and 98 specialty skills, and gain 6 free broad skills determined by our species, and as an android those are athletics, stamina, knowledge, technical science, awareness, and interaction. And for now, let's just focus on our strength skills. We look up our intelligence on the hero starting skill points table, and at intelligence 11 we have 50 skill points and a maximum of 5 broad skills. excluding the free ones we already got, with humans gaining an additional 5 skill points and 1 more broad skill. Each skill, broad and specialty, has a cost and associated professions. For example, most of the strength skills are associated with the combat spec profession, while power martial arts is also associated with free agent. And of course, we already got athletics for free, so let's just fill in our score skills for athletics, which are equal to our strength score, 13, half our strength score, 6, and 1/4 our strength score, 3. And I will explain why we have 3 scores later. And those are also our scores for all untrained, non-restricted specialty skills in the athletics skill, although there are other differences that will be explained later. Then if we wanted to put a rank in climb, that would cost 2 points, and bump our climb score up to 14, 7, and 3 as those divisions are applied to whatever the main score is. And if we wanted to add another rank, it would cost 2 points plus the number of current ranks, so 3 total for the second rank. But let's move on and say that we wanted to learn unarmed attacks. The broad unarmed attack skill costs 5 points and counts as one of our 5 broad skills. And purchasing the broad skill basically unlocks our ability to purchase ranks in the specialty skills, in this case brawl and power martial arts. However, power martial arts is a trained-only skill as indicated by the underline, so while we can buy ranks in it now, we cannot use that skill unless we do, whereas brawling we can use at the broad unarmed attack score. Then let's pick up the melee weapons broad skill, which costs 6 points. However, as it is one of the skills associated with the combat spec profession, we can buy it at the list price -1, so 5. And then a couple of ranks in powered weapon, which cost 4 points, -1, so 3 and 4 is 7. And notably, diplomats get to choose a second profession to be counted as for the purpose of that skill cost discount. And with just that handful of skills, that is already almost half of our total points and broad skills, so let's just spend the rest of our points and move on to Step 7, Choose Attributes, where we get a motivation, moral attitude, and 2 traits. And these are basically just role-playing guides, but can also earn or cost you achievement points. And I am not incredibly fond of rules that essentially try to bribe or threaten players into role-playing the correct way, because it plays into the worst kind of player and leads to scenarios where players are asking, what course of action will earn me a reward, instead of what course of action will be fun or interesting. And there are a lot of examples provided, or you can make up your own, so let's just go with personal power, selfish, and curious and independent. And then on to the final step, 8. Complete the hero sheet. And this is basically the everything else step, including equipment, which really feels like it should have been its own step, especially considering that choose attributes was its own step. But let's just take care of our equipment so that we can actually move on to the character sheet. We get 5d8 times 20 starting funds, with humans getting twice that amount, so 640 gold, I guess, is the standard. It seems like maybe they were trying to do something less lazy and unimaginative, as at times they do seem to go out of their way to use terminology like cash or funds instead of gold. However, it could also be a swing in the opposite direction, and that language is just a holdover from the Alternity rules that they forgot to change, as a lot of this book does have the unfortunate feeling of being less written using the Alternity rules and more edited from the Alternity book. It's just too bad that Gamma World never had any kind of setting-specific currency that they could use. That would be really convenient right here, you know, if that were a thing, which obviously it must not be, or else they would have used it. So let's pull up the melee weapon table and point out a few things. All pieces of equipment are classified as either Gamma Age, the age in which the game takes place and is basically everything that has been rediscovered since the apocalypse, Ancient, basically the stuff we have now, excluding the things that have been rediscovered, or Shadow Age, which is the high-tech futuristic equipment from the time during the war with the invaders. Yeah, this edition specifically has the cataclysmic event be a war with aliens. Like, humans are still at fault, but bringing in that outside force really takes a bit of the impact out of the whole "you maniacs, you blew it up" aspect of the setting. Although, notably, katana are classified as ancient despite all other pre-20th century melee weapons being Gamma Age, because a society with the technological sophistication to make flintlock firearms would obviously still be unable to master the ancient and mystical art of Japanese swordsmithing. I'm not joking, they literally say that. Having a weird fetishized view of Japanese culture in general, and swords specifically, was quite fashionable at the time. And also, all Shadow Age weapons and many other Shadow Age items are marked with an H, indicating that they are DNA locked and only function for humans, or an A, which indicates they only function for humans and androids. And looking at our options, we actually have enough money to buy a chainsaw, but spending all of our funds on a chainsaw would be silly. Unfortunately, I'm kinda silly, so chainsaw it is. Then let's get some leather armor and some post-apocalyptic survival and exploration essentials. Then, as an android, we get some free additional equipment, specifically cybernetic enhancements. An implanted nanocomputer, which is required to operate other cybernetic enhancements, cyber optics, which is a cyber eye with up to 50 times magnification, and optic screen, which is a heads-up display for the nanocomputer, which can also aid in targeting for ranged attacks. And worth mentioning, this is 11,500 gold worth of free cyberware we're getting, and also we don't have to pay the 10 skill points that other species do to learn to operate the nanocomputer, which are arguably more valuable than gold. And then, finally, we get to the character sheet, where we calculate our action check, which is equal to the average of our dexterity and intelligence, which are conveniently both 11, with a bonus determined by our profession, 1 for diplomat and tech op, 2 for free agent, and 3 for combat spec. And of course, this is our ordinary action check score, then half that for good, quarter that for amazing, and +1 for marginal, as well as a base die of plus D0, a thing they decided was a thing. Then actions per round, so we add our will and constitution, then look up the result on the actions per round table, and 10 plus 11 is 21, and 2 actions per round. Then combat movement rates, so we add our strength and dexterity, 24, and look that up on the combat movement rates table, and we have a sprint of 24, run of 16, walk of 6, easy swim of 3, and swim of 6, and glide and fly don't really apply to us because we have no way to utilize those. Then durability, and we have 4 different types of hit points, stun and wound points equal to our constitution, 10, and then mortal and fatigue points equal to half our constitution, 5. With humans gaining an additional 2 points of stun and wound, and Sasquatches calculating their durability using 1.5 times their constitution. Then our attack forms, so first we look up our strength on the strength and damage table, and with a strength of 13, we have a +2 damage adjustment. Then our unarmed attack, and for score we put our scores from the unarmed attack broad skill, then the base die, and because we are not trained in any specialty skill, that is plus D4. And once again, these things will make sense at some point. Then in the type column, low impact and ordinary, then damage and unarmed strikes deal 1d4 stun on an ordinary result, 1d4 plus 1 stun on a good, and 1d4 plus 2 stun on amazing, which of course are 1d4 plus 2, 3, and 4 with our plus 2 bonus. Then the same for our chainsaw, so score equal to our powered melee weapon skill, base die would be D0 because that's a specialty skill, However, as a combat spec, we could just select one weapon specialty skill and increase the base die by one step to -d4. However, a chainsaw also has a +1 accuracy penalty, which sets it back down to +d0. A chainsaw is also low impact and ordinary, and deals, including our bonus, d6 plus 3 wound, d6 plus 4 wound, and d4 plus 2 mortal damage. Then armor, and our leather armor has d6 minus 2 against low impact, and d6 minus 4 against high impact and energy damage. Then we get a number of last resort points based on our personality score, and with a personality of 4, we have maximum and starting points of 0. And basically what these are points that you can spend to increase or decrease the degree of success on a roll, with free agents increasing their maximum points by 1 and being able to spend 2 points at a time to change the result by 2 steps. However, you may also notice this cost column, which is how many points you have to spend to buy more last resort points after you use them. They do not regenerate on their own. After character creation, the only way to get spent points back is to buy them with skill points, which honestly makes being able to spend 2 of them at once a somewhat less desirable ability. So not having any of them isn't that much of a loss. And this character is done. And that was a Gamma World 5th edition. I still have to explain all that stuff, don't I? So, the basic mechanics here are kinda simple. When you need to roll, you roll a control die and a situation die. The control die is always a d20, and the situation die depends on the situation. So, let's look at some situations. For the simplest, let's say that we want to do some average climbing. Climb is a specialty skill in which we have 2 ranks for a total skill rating of 15. So we roll the control die and the base situation die of plus d0. For whatever reason, they're very insistent on this d0 thing. With an ordinary success on a result equal to or under that skill score, and then good and amazing successes on the corresponding half and quarter scores. And you can really understand what the idea was here, but also you do kind of end up with a weird situation where amazing and good results are fairly likely to have the same odds, or at most a 5% difference. But now let's take it up one step and say that we wanted to throw something. We have no ranks in the throw skill, so we would have to make that check using our broad athletics skill. The target is just equal to our strength score of 13, so we roll the control die, but then, because this is a broad skill, the base situation die increases to plus d4, meaning we add a d4 to the roll. And since this is a roll under system, adding a d4 to the roll is bad. But now let's get even more complicated and say that we suddenly need to assemble an ancient desktop computer. That would require the computer hardware skill, and just like throw, we do not have any ranks in that skill, so it would just use the broad computer science skill, which we also do not have. So that skill check would be made against our untrained intelligence of 5, with the broad skill situation die of plus d4. But also, just in general, assembling an unfamiliar piece of technology is a bit tricky, so let's say that this is also a slightly difficult task, which brings up the situation die to plus d6. And also, that there are zombies that are trying to break down the door, and we need to assemble this PC to stop them, which bumps it up another step to plus d8. And then, hypothetically, if we were a Sasquatch, that would go up 2 more steps to plus d20, since they just take a plus 2 penalty to using technology. And assuming that we did manage to get everything up and running, if we then needed to hack into the system, we would just not be able to even attempt it, because the hacking skill cannot be used untrained. But now let's return to climbing, which still has a base situation die of plus d0 and a target of 15, But let's say that this time the surface we are climbing is wet, which increases the situation die by +1 step to +d4. But it also goes the other way. So let's say that we happen to have complete climbing gear, which adjusts the situation die by -3 steps to -d6, meaning we would subtract a d6 from the d20 roll. Basically, you roll a d20 and then add a situation die, which is the sum of all difficulty modifiers moving up and down that scale, with success on a result equal to or under the score, and then greater successes for results meeting those 1/2 and 1/4 base scores. So, very similar to how some of the checks worked in Gamma World 4th edition, except that there was just a static difficulty modifier added to a roll instead of a die. And I like the die much better because it also makes auto successes and failures impossible in all but some very extreme cases. Like, we could make a successful untrained personality check with a +d20 situation die, it's just a 1 in 400 chance. But now it's time for what everyone's been looking forward to, artifact identification. So let's say we have encountered a thing, and we want to know, what is that thing? Identifying the thing is a complex deduce check, which is like a regular check except that we must make a specific number of successful rolls instead of just one. How many? Well, in this case, an ancient item requires 5 successful rolls to identify, modified by a number of things. So let's say, for example, that this is a single function item, and let's just say that the function is obvious. That would cut it down to a total of 3 successes needed. And as always, none of this information is player-facing. They just roll dice and receive outcomes. However, we can also attempt to give ourselves a bonus to this roll by making an artifact knowledge check, gaining a -1 step bonus for each degree of success. And a good result means -2 steps. So we roll our deduce check, which as a specialty skill has a base die of +d0, -1 for being an android, and then -2 for our good artifact knowledge result, for -d8 overall. And success, which moves us up 1 step on the table. Then we roll again, and fail, which just means no advancement, but if you fail 3 times, then the attempt is over at whatever the result is of the step you happen to be on at the time. In this case, believing that we have identified the function of the item when we really have not. Then we just continue rolling, and success, and we have identified the thing. It is a flashlight. So I guess it's not as bad as in previous editions, like it actually uses the core mechanics of the game. But it's still not good. It is still just very much, once again, let's stop playing the game for a little while and just roll some dice while making no decisions until something happens. So, with that behind us, it is now time to talk about combat, everyone's actual favorite part of the video, I assume. So, let's say that we have encountered a skeeter, which is a giant flightless mosquito, which means it is time to make our action checks. So we roll against our action check score, and 20 is a marginal success. Basically, failure on any roll that you can't actually fail on is considered a marginal success. And for some reason, we needed to write that in as a special value. And the skeeter rolls 2, but its battle sense mutation gives it a -1 step bonus, so -d4, and 11 for an ordinary success. And those success levels correspond to the 4 phases of the action round: amazing, good, ordinary, and marginal. Yeah, trying to use the fewest number of terms to refer to the most number of things in the game was a dumb design trend for a while. And that means that the skeeter can act in the ordinary phase, but we cannot act until the marginal phase. Yeah, an action check is just initiative. So nothing, nothing, and then the skeeter uses one of its 2 actions to run up to us, and the second to attack with its feeder tube. rolling against its attack score of 12, and I'm just going to assume this counts as a specialty skill, so a base situation die of plus D0, plus 2 because it is attacking in the same phase as running, and another plus 2 from our strength resistance modifier. And that is what the resistance modifiers are. Basically, they are applied as a difficulty modifier to any opposed checks. So plus 4 overall, which is plus D12, and a miss. Then it is our turn, and since the Skeeter was nice enough to bring itself within range, we can just attack with our chainsaw. Rolling versus our powered melee score of 15, and because our combat spec bonus, our base situation die is minus D4, but then plus 1 for the chainsaw's accuracy penalty, and minus 1 for the Skeeter's strength resistance modifier for minus D4 overall. And an ordinary success, which deals 1d6 plus 3 wounds, so 5 wound damage. Then, for every 2 points of wound damage, 1 point of secondary stun damage, so 5 wounds and 2 stun overall. Then we can use our second action on any subsequent phase. Unfortunately, there are not any subsequent phases, so round 2 fight. Once again, action checks, and this time our result is good and the Skeeter's is ordinary. So nothing amazing happens, then once again we attack with all of the same modifiers, then something amazing does happen. And an amazing result on our chainsaw deals 1d4 plus 2 mortal damage, so 3. And then for every 2 points of mortal damage a creature takes, 1 point of wound and 1 point of stun, so 3 mortal, 1 wound, and 1 stun damage overall. Then onto the ordinary phase, where we would very much like to use our second action. However, the Skeeter also acts in the ordinary phase, and when 2 creatures try to act in the same phase, well, technically the actions occur simultaneously with effects such as damage being applied at the end of the phase, which interestingly makes double knockouts very possible. However, that does also make things a bit more complicated for this demonstration, so when order does need to be determined, priority goes to the creature who has not already acted in that round. And we have acted, whereas the Skeeter has not, so it rolls, no longer taking the movement penalty, but still suffering our plus 2 resistance modifier, and another plus 3, one for each point of mortal damage taken, for a total modifier of plus 5, but still manages to get a good result and deals 1d4 wound damage. However, armor reduces damage, so our leather armor versus a low impact mosquito attack reduces the damage by 1d6 minus 2. And 3 minus 2 is 1, 4 minus 1 is 3, so we take 3 wound damage. And armor does not reduce secondary damage, so 2 stun. And the Skeeter also injects us with a paralytic poison, which we, an android, are susceptible to for aforementioned lazy design reasons, which has a plus 1 step penalty, onset of 2 rounds, and a duration per constitution feat check. So let's pull up the poison table, and a feat check is just an attribute check with the plus 4 situation die, so 8, an ordinary success, which is a duration of 1d4, so 3 hours. So what do all these things mean? Well, the poison rules are kinda poorly explained, but based on a general reading of the rules here and in Alternity, I will assume that the step bonus applies to actions during the poison's onset period, and then the onset period of 2 rounds means that the poison will take effect after 2 rounds, which I will say is at the end of the ordinary phase of round 4. And then the roll duration of 3 hours is pretty self-explanatory. But then you might be wondering, what does this plus 1 step penalty mean on the duration table? And I don't know, maybe you just re-roll another duration and suffer a plus 1 penalty for that duration instead of full paralysis. But now we get to use our second action to once again attack, this time with an additional plus 1 penalty from the poison, so plus D0 overall, and another ordinary success for 8 wound damage, which as previously mentioned also imparts 4 stun damage. However, the Skeeter only has 2 wound points remaining, and losing all of your wound or stun points results in a knockout. But we also have 6 additional wound damage over the maximum, in which case each 2 points of wound damage over the wound point maximum results in 1 point of mortal damage. So we have 2 wound, 4 stun, and 3 mortal damage total, and since that is also all of the Skeeter's mortal points, it is dead. And for defeating the Skeeter, we get nothing. Yeah, no experience points, no status points, no nothing. As previously mentioned, this edition uses achievement points. So we have an achievement track, and for now I'm just going to assume this is correct. Our achievement goal is the box above our current level, which as a level 1 character is the 6th box. Probably. The advancement section of the book shows a piece of the advancement track, which puts the first level goal on the 6th box, and the character sheet in the Alternity book also has it on the 6th box, but the character sheet in the Gamma World book has it on the 5th box, which means that every achievement goal is 1 point lower, until you get to 14 where it starts drifting, until 23 where it's the 28th box again. Just, the level of quality you would expect from Wizards of the Coast. Also, as long as I'm here, the copyright notice on the sheet says Copyright 2000 TSR, so they definitely changed it from the Alternity version because it has the changed date, but didn't change it to Wizards of the Coast, which does seem to suggest the possibility that as late as near the end of development on this book, they were intending to continue using the TSR branding. Point is, I'm saying 6th box, but I guarantee this was not an uncommon topic of arguments at the tables that actually did run this game. So, how do we get achievement points if we don't get them for killing monsters? Well, the Game Master will award 1 to 3 achievement points for a completed adventure, plus 1 additional point for role-playing your character's motivation, moral attitudes, and/or traits, as well as a possible -1 for not role-playing them correctly, and another +1 for doing something truly spectacular, noble, self-sacrificing, or heroic. And overall, I do like this kind of cumulative achievement-based experience point reward system significantly more than a number of points for killing things, for a whole host of reasons that, as I keep saying, I will eventually make an entire video on. But let's just say that this happens to be at the end of a particularly challenging adventure in which we roleplayed our attributes well and spectacularly and heroically bisected that Skeeter, and also an extra point as compensation for getting really sticky in the process. Wow, look at that, 6 points, just how many we need to level up. How convenient. So, upon reaching our goal, our achievement level increases to 2, meaning that our next advancement is at 7 points. Yeah, every single level is just 1 point more than the last. Then we convert all of our accumulated achievement points into skill points, with Tech Ops gaining additional skill points based on their level, and that's basically it. So, now we have 6 skill points, which we could use to increase our skills. Although notably at this point, just for example, buying 1 more rank in powered weapons would cost 5 points of the 6 that we have. And also, we will not be buying any skill ranks because skill points are the only form of advancement we get, and starting at 3rd level can also be spent to increase our action check score and base situation die, number of actions, ability scores, and assorted durability points. And even then, you can only take each of those upgrades between 1 to 3 times. So weirdly, spending your skill points on skills isn't going to be the best use of them a lot of the time. And remember, you also have to spend skill points to replenish last resort points, which is why I was so dismissive of them earlier. Spending 2 or 3 points to be able to change the success level of 1 roll doesn't really seem like that great of a value compared to saving them for something like an additional wound point or action. and seems like it would discourage players from using them in all but the most life or death situations. It's kinda like the hero points from D20 Modern, but even worse because instead of only getting them when you level up, you basically have to buy them instead of leveling up. And you know, it's just not good when the mechanics discourage their own use. So we're just going to hold on to those 6 points for now, and then probably buy one of the action check bonuses at level 3, since that will mean losing less actions to marginal results. And that was a Gamma World 5th edition character. Also basically an Alternity character, as this is an Alternity campaign setting that just happens to have complete rules. Like, they specifically mention how characters from the other Alternity settings could wind up in Gamma Terra through space, dimension, or time travel. And weirdly enough, this is not the only alternate version of Alternity released by Wizards of the Coast in the year 2000. There was also Alternity Adventure Game, StarCraft Edition. And from a modern perspective where system branding is annoyingly prevalent in both major and indie tabletop role-playing game publishing, it is weird to see Wizards of the Coast, of all people, a company that actively tried to poison the market for any other system by flooding it with D20 system products, which isn't a theory or baseless accusation, it is something they publicly outlined as their marketing strategy and were very proud of, struggle with that language for, this is a complete game using a pre-existing system. But you know, as a campaign setting with rules included, man, still wish there was a term for that, it's, you know, it's okay. Some of the mechanics are a bit cumbersome and unnecessarily complicated, but I mean, it's not like it's the most complicated game released by Wizards of the Coast in the year 2000. And from the specific perspective of someone who has spent years playing D&D and Pathfinder, and also a lot of time researching the evolution of both D&D and Gamma World, it is also very interesting as a divergent path of that evolution. Like this and the D20 system both seem like a natural progression from the almost unified rules of Gamma World 4th edition, just focusing on different parts of those rules. It has this weird feeling of being a bizarro alternate D20 system that I kinda like despite some significant flaws, but admittedly that could be because of the novelty of it. And that is it for Gamma World 5th edition, the 5thest edition of Gamma World, and the last edition to not be directly based on Dungeons & Dragons, which unfortunately means that next time, it's D20 Modern. Which, you know, that isn't to say there won't be some surprises. And thank you for watching. If you want more of my special brand of wit and insight, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Twitter, even Tumblr. Especially Tumblr. There are links in the description. And extra special thanks to my Fight and Flail Snails, Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Hasterfan, Randy Mulholland, Renee D, Sean Betts, Stephen Kramer, and Toshiro Kuro. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon. Also, channel memberships are now a thing, so you can check those out too. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos that the dark, unseen hand of the YouTube algorithm has lovingly selected for you, which I am sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.